joining us for The Love of Wisdom with Alan Watts, in a talk from our second radio series on Zen. Through his books and public lectures, Alan Watts introduced millions of people in the West to Eastern thought. Today's program was recorded in the mid-1960s on the ferryboat Vallejo. It comes from a seminar on early Chinese Zen. Here's Alan Watts.
This morning I simply tried to give you a general survey of what Zen is about by way of being an introduction. And I was discussing the peculiar reasons for the interest in Zen in the West, stressing the extraordinary way in which the sort of now you see it, now you don't implication of Zen literature has fired people's imagination and curiosity. That the feeling there is a new vision of the world in the aspect of its unity as distinct from our ordinary vision of the world in the aspect of its multiplicity and broken upness, fallen apartness. And that this is something that you might somehow suddenly catch at any minute. It isn't that Zen is an easy thing, or that it's a difficult thing. It might be either. And but it exercises this peculiar fascination by saying that the vision of the world in its unity is terribly obvious. It's right under your nose, only you're looking too hard in the wrong place, so you don't see it. And so this is always the same puzzle as if I said to you, if you came here, and said, well, we want some philosophical enlightenment or whatever, and I looked at you in a funny way and said, but you've forgotten something. As if you hadn't got your pants on or something. What have you forgotten? Who do you think you are, anyhow? Well, you say, I'm just me. Oh, now, come on. Don't give me that line. Well, what do you mean? I'm just poor little me. Oh, nuts. Don't put on that act. And that, essentially, you see, it's that kind of upaya which a Zen teacher uses. Upaya is a Sanskrit word meaning pedagogical techniques in spiritual disciplines. In politics, it means cunning, but in the vocabulary of Buddhism or Hinduism, it means the expert cunning used by a teacher to surprise and trick his students out of their egocentricity. And Zen, therefore, in all these koans, dialogues, rough zazen practices, and so on, it's all upaya. It's a colossal hoax, but a very beneficent one. Now, true Zen came to birth in China as a result of a sort of interplay between Buddhism and Taoism. Now, both the Confucians and the Taoists although there's a certain Puritanism in Confucian ethics, they all believe in the physical world as a good thing. The Taoist loves nature, the Confucian is particular about parents and family and all that jazz. The Buddhists of India, on the other hand, tended very often to be anti-physical. I mean, in other words, to be celibate, to be interested in getting out of this state of consciousness in which the world appears to us in its multiplicity. The Chinese never could get on with that. They didn't see any sense in that Indian attitude. So when Buddhism came to China, the Chinese did a flip with it. And they wanted a kind of Buddhism which, although it was sort of monastic in the Indian tradition, was not monastic in the way that it is in India or in Burma, Ceylon. Buddhism for the Chinese is to some extent a thing which you go into for a time and you attain enlightenment. And then you can come back, as it were, and do anything you want. You can have family, you can be a tramp, you can just play it any way. But they feel with the whole tone of the Mahayana type of Buddhism, even in India, is that once enlightened you ought to come back. So the situation of a Buddhist monk in the Far East is, generally speaking, that he's not quite like a monk as we understand monks in the West. Monks in the West take life vows. They vow poverty, chastity, and obedience until they die. But in the Far East, a Buddhist monk may go into the discipline for a number of years and then return to lay life with no bad feelings. In fact, he may be considered a considerable success in having done so. So that kind of trend in the Confucian and the Taoist attitudes, when it coalesces with Indian Buddhism, produces something very different from anything you'll find in India. And Zen uniquely and outstandingly represents this sort of attitude. I have to explain this by telling a sort of a modern anecdote. Joseph Campbell, who is, as you know, the editor of all the works of Heinrich Zimmer, and actually wrote them himself out of Zimmer's notes, went to India, and he went to the greatest living guru in India today, who is an ex-policeman, and said to him, the sutras say that all things are Brahman. Isn't this also true of the illusion, of the Maya? Isn't that the way, we feel every day and just ordinary kind of human beings? Isn't that the Brahman too? And this man said, it's interesting. That was the first question I asked my teacher. He said, of course they are. Well, Joe said, nobody in India teaches that anymore. So the guru took Joseph downstairs to all his students and said, I want you to meet a great rishi, sage from America. He really has found it. And you should, he will now give you a lecture or something. I don't know what happened. In other words, the Hindu tends to say, yes, in fact, all this world that you see now before your eyes is the divine, ultimate, non-dual reality. But of course, you have to find out that it is. And when you do, it will disappear. You will go into what they call nirvikalpa samadhi. That means, technically, it means being in a state of samadhi without having concepts. But they mean something else by it. They mean as if all the shapes that you saw before you were suddenly to dim out. And instead there is nothing but light. You see? Maybe this light is slightly violet, but I don't know. Anyway, that every kind of sensual experience disappears. Now then, the way in which you have to argue this with a Hindu Swami who takes this line is to say, but your position is still dualistic, because you've moved from the vision of form to the formless vision. This is just changing places. This is not liberation. It's somewhere else on the wheel. And you know they have to admit it. And I once had an argument with a Swami in which I brought up a point we were discussing this morning. He was referring to the Brahman, the ultimate reality, as the one. As oneness, as distinct from multiplicity. I said, oneness has an opposite, and the Brahman has no opposite. And what do you think he said? He said, you argue just like a Hindu. Well, he knew very well. I mean, he was using loose language, and as we all do. So, this was the thing, you see, historically, in the development of Indian philosophy that took place between about 100 and 400 AD, that they faced the fact that looking for a state of consciousness that's radically different from this state now is just an escape. It hasn't really come to terms with the problem. The problem is, you see, that the state of consciousness you're in now, however loused up it may be, is in Hindu language the play of Vishnu. You are all Vishnu playing that you're in this mess, which is the part of the cosmic dance. So, if that's the case, dig it, you see? I mean, get with it. Be that. So the Chinese caught on to this. And when you could say, this very moment, this very world, this very body is the point. Now. But if you see you're seeking something beyond all the time, you never get with it. You're never here. So they saw that very clearly. So this man, Sun Tzu, who I was talking about at the end of this morning's session, who is one of the first, I would say, really articulate people about Zen, who wrote the Xin Xin Ming, he starts out by saying, the great Tao, or the perfect Tao, is without difficulty, except that it avoids picking and choosing. Only when you neither love nor hate does it appear in all clarity. A hair's breadth of deviation from it, and a deep gulf is set between heaven and earth. If you want to get hold of what it looks like, do not be anti or pro anything. The conflict of longing and loathing, this is the disease of the mind. Okay, now, if you take that quite literally, if you try to avoid picking and choosing, that's another kind of choice, isn't it? If you say, I ought not to love anything, I ought not to hate anything. I ought not to take any extreme attitudes. You're still choosing. If I say in psychological jargon, for psychiatric health, you ought to accept yourself. You know? Accept everything that happens. Well, among the things that happen is the very concrete fact that there are things you don't accept and that you can't accept. So you have to accept that. Now, do you see what this does? It's a very interesting technique. It's saying that you are, each one, a Buddha, enlightened, even before you've accepted yourself. You see, you don't have to do anything about it. But it's terribly difficult for human beings to resist the temptation to do something about it. So it says, okay, do that. If you want to practice yoga and meditation, go ahead. If you feel that would make you better, do it. But the point is that there's really nothing to do, or there's nothing not to do either. You won't get this by sort of acting spontaneous in a phony way, but you can do that if you wanted to. But you're it right where you stand without making a single move. And that's what's meant, you see, profoundly by avoiding picking and choosing. Actually, there's nothing you can do about it. You may get the illusion that your picking and choosing makes a real difference, that your choices really do change the nature of things, but they don't. And so, so long as you want to hang on to that illusion and play it, there you are. But actually, you are, as you live and all sit around this room at the moment, in the various stages of what you may consider subjectively to be goodness and badness, sickness and health, sanity and insanity. Every one of you is as much a splendid accomplishment as the shape of the clouds, and just as natural. You know, with all the funny hairdos and artificiality and everything. We're all like the birds. Only we have a complicated way of pretending that we aren't, so that we figure out we're something special. And that's it too, you see. But it is a tough job getting anybody to see that. So what do? They have all these techniques, and they put you through the mill, because people won't accept this vision until they feel they've paid for it. Until they feel, they finally discover after enormous effort, like the student I told you about this morning, there isn't anything to realize. It really is fantastic. See, so all this is very direct and simple. So not picking and choosing doesn't mean that you have to cultivate being detached. You can try that, sure. But then you find you're terribly attached to your non-attachment. Like you're proud of your humility or something like that. It just goes round and round and round. So, you know, come unstuck. Well, you always were unstuck because you're in the flow. And nothing is stuck. It all is changing, changing, changing. One is nothing but a flow of change. There isn't anything to hang on to, and nobody to hang on to it. You know, here is a decaying hand grasping at smoke. It's all falling apart. And there's nothing anybody can do about it, because what anybody is who perhaps could do something about it, that is falling apart too. That's what's meant by the doctrine of anatman. There is no, the Buddhist idea that there is no permanent self, because it's all falling apart. So cheer up, you know, it's great. So not knowing the profound meaning of things, we disturb our original peace of mind to no purpose. Original peace of mind is what I was referring to as the infant's, the baby's fundamental knowledge of the unity of the world, the oceanic feeling that Freud calls it. Perfect like great space, the Tao lacks nothing and has nothing in excess. Truly, because of our accepting and rejecting, we don't get the suchness of things. You see, I explained suchness this morning, how it's the way everything is just like that. But we pick out some things as significant and other things as not significant. And this prevents us from seeing that all the insignificant things are in a way significant, and all the significant things are in a way insignificant. See, that I go on living is for me significant until I don't anymore. But that means I'm going to run around busy, talk a lot and work and eat and entertain and do this, that and the other, and it's a great dance. Actually, it has no more ultimate meaning than somebody sitting and going. One Zen master said, "From the bathtub to the bathtub, I have uttered stuff and nonsense." That was his death verse. The bathtub in which the baby is washed at birth, the bathtub in which the corpse is washed before burial. All the time he's been talking nonsense. And so all these birds are going around, caw, 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 and all these human beings are going, making this great hullabaloo and building houses and all that kind of thing. And it's all, it's just suchness, that's the point. So, neither follow after nor dwell with the doctrine of the void. I mean, don't get hooked on the idea that things are empty, and therefore that this is a way of saying that the world is a ghastly sham and something you ought to avoid. That's what this means. So don't try to catch hold of this doctrine as if it would do you some good. And on the other hand, don't dwell with it. Don't get attached to it. For if the mind is at peace, these wrong views disappear of themselves. The mind at peace is not quite what we ordinarily mean by peace of mind. Oh, he quotes the thing here on the comment, neither follow after nor dwell with the doctrine of the void. This verse from another early Chinese Zen master. Getting rid of things and clinging to emptiness is an illness of the same kind. It is just like throwing oneself into a fire to avoid being drowned. When activity is stopped, there is passivity. Now, when activity is stopped and there is passivity, this passivity, again, is a state of activity. You see? If you practice detachment and being calm in mind and free from all worldly passions, this in its own turn is a worldly passion, since you're attached to this new state. You see, that's the Chinese criticism of the Hindu viewpoint. Stay where you are. If you try to be spiritual, this is putting legs on a snake. And the snake doesn't need any legs and is only confused by them when it gets them. But you may have to try to be spiritual, or whatever the equivalent for this is, psychoanalyzed, integrated, clear, all the words that are used. You may have to try to do that to find this out. but that everything you add in this way, by clinging to some idea of detachment, spiritual freedom, nirvana, whatever, all that in the end is an artificiality that will be sloughed off. So you might say, to use Spiegelberg's phrase, Zen is the religion of no religion. That the highest perfection of religion is just not to have any noticeable religion. See, the gulls don't have a religion. They don't preach, they don't pray, they don't recite sutras. But the human beings have to do this thing and have Buddhas and all that. And when you really get the point, none of that's necessary. But then you can have it just for kicks.
You've been listening to Alan Watts from the Alan Watts radio series number 8 on Zen. For information on how to obtain the radio series on cassette tape, call 1-800-969-2887. Or you can write to the Electronic University, P.O. Box 2309, San Anselmo, California, 94979. When you call or write, please indicate the name of your local station that you heard a selection from the Alan Watts radio series number 8 on Zen. Again, the phone number is 1-800-969-2887. That's 1-800-WO-WATTS. The Love of Wisdom with Alan Watts is produced by the Electronic University. Our theme music is by Zakir Hussain, courtesy of Moment Records. I'm Neil Harvey. Thank you for listening.